What's up, edugamers? We're going to look at a question about designing games for learning today. And I'm Dustin Satz from Board Game with Education, so let's get to it. So we're calling these episodes videocast episodes because it's standalone content, but we're also looking back at a previous episode on the Board Gaming with Education podcast. That's released every Monday on any podcasting platform, so be sure to check that out because what we're going to talk about now is entirely different from the podcast episode. I had the awesome opportunity to talk to Jessica on the show. She is an immersive experience designer dedicated to crafting playful experiences that bring people together. So we asked her this question: how do you design a game when the intent is on learning? How do you manage that? What do you do with the fun? So let's listen into what she had to say.
I think part of it is that when you're trying to find this balance between learning and fun, because they're not always the same thing, leading with fun, there's nothing wrong with that. You can sit in the fun for a really long time and let the learning sneak in or seep in later on in a game.
Wow. So let's look at the point that she made. So she said when you're designing or trying to find that balance between learning and fun, to lead with the fun is not a bad thing to do. It is something that she actually goes on in the episode to suggest. But let's look at this point a little bit further. Let's look at it outside of what we discussed on the podcast and talk about it together now. Leading with the fun, as Jessica puts it, is an excellent first step in ironing out the design of your game. Whether that's designing a hobby board game as entertainment, designing maybe an educational game with clear learning outcomes, or if you're a teacher using a game-based learning lesson in your class, looking at what is the fun and really drilling into that fun aspect of the game and then moving on from there. So we really need to look at the goal of your game. What is the reason for implementing this game? Are you a hobby game designer and you want to sprinkle in some learning into your game? Are you designing a game meant for entertainment that is also educational? Or are you a teacher designing a game or a game-based lesson for your class? Once you know the goal of your game, you can kind of move on from there. If it's a hobby game, you probably don't need to rely very heavily on the learning. You can kind of let that fall aside. But if you're designing a game for a game-based lesson in your classroom, that's a completely different story. So game-based learning needs to have clearly defined learning outcomes. So if you are using a game-based lesson, you can design activities outside of the game to support the learning. So those activities might not inherently be fun, but paired with the game, we can create a very engaging and effective lesson. So you might ask students to maybe record data based on the game. With the game Evolution, a lesson plan I've developed, I've asked students to record data at different points in the game to really look at the cause and effect that happens in the game and compare that to real world ecosystems. Or you might ask students to take notes. Maybe you're playing a historical game and the experience that the characters are playing as, maybe you need to take notes and understand that process or how things change within the history of the game. So those are just a couple of examples. We might be able to support the learning through the game by still leading with the fun. So I have a little bit more from Jessica. I want to talk about a point she made immediately after the one she talked about when she discussed leading with the fun. So here it is.
Setting people up so that they're in an emotional and cognitive space to learn is so much of the battle. And so sometimes really just creating an environment for learning will do your work for you and is a really joyful experience.
All right, let's look at that second point. She said setting people up in an emotional and cognitive space to learn is so much of the battle. I absolutely agree with her here, and I want to look at this a little bit more. It is in line with her previous point where she talks about the fun being able to tee up the learning to the game. So just getting it set up to go. I want to look at this as a broader approach to our classroom environment as a teacher. So playing games in our classroom is a great way to tee up the learning environment as a whole for our students. I mean, even if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can see that games and playing games can probably fall right smack dab in the middle of psychological needs. Playing games really creates a sense of belonging in our classroom, creates a sense of camaraderie. So I think that games are a great opportunity to build those relationships in our classroom and make our students feel safe and comfortable in our class to learn. So next time we're trying to think about ways to maybe grow our culture in our classroom or build those relationships, maybe we can think about just playing a game. Stay tuned for Videocast episode number 2 and check out our podcast released on Mondays. All right, until next time.